Maybe Republicans are right. Maybe the left is out of touch with real America. Stick with me here. Maybe as we clamor for accountability for Donald Trump's attempted insurrection and we call out the growing appetite for political violence among his supporters, we're missing something important about them. For instance, maybe we got the Proud Boys wrong. Maybe they're not a far-right militant group that has attacked or intimidated gays and lesbians, racial minorities, protesters of police violence. Maybe they didn't play a pivotal role in the first sacking of the Capitol since 1814. Maybe they're just misunderstood. That's the crux of an opinion column by a concerned Florida mother, published over the weekend in the Sarasota Herald Tribune. The headline reads, "Attacking Proud Boys does a disservice to caring school parents." And beneath that, the mother, Melissa Radovich, sings the group's praises. Quote, "When I think about the Proud Boys, I think of fathers, business owners, and veterans. These fathers have spoken at many school board meetings. They are concerned about the direction that their local schools are heading in, and I commend them for coming to school board meetings." Radovich added that she believes liberals are attacking the Proud Boys because, quote, "they're opposed to abortion. They stand for America and freedom, against communist organizations. They believe that discussions of homosexuality are best left to parents, and they stand against medical mandates, such as the illegal mask mandate." Radovich also attacks a local school board candidate, Lauren Kernoff, who, quote, "has not told the truth about her work experience at Planned Parenthood." Radovich writes that Kernoff said she was proud of the work she had done with the organization, and then asks, quote, "if so, why would she leave that detail off of her resume?" That is a fascinating question because, you see, it can be asked about concerned mom Melissa Radovich too. Nowhere in her column does Radovich or the Sarasota Herald Tribune note that she is in fact the wife of a Proud Boy, something that was reported just a week ago in, let me see now, yes, the Sarasota Herald Tribune itself. The column in that paper notes that Nicholas Radovich, a Proud Boy, and his wife Melissa also co-founded a group called Unmask Freedom, which the author says was a front group for these Proud Boys to hold events and make social media posts. If concerned mom Melissa Radovich is so proud of the Proud Boys, why didn't she or the paper she wrote for disclose her own connection to the group? As reporters began to ask that question, the Herald Tribune removed Radovich's pro-Proud Boys column. Its link now directs readers to an error page, but it lives on in the internet archives. On Monday, the paper's executive editor apologized, saying the column should never have been published, adding, quote, "we are adding additional higher-level review of the process for accepting and editing guest columns for publication." Good they owned up to their mistake, but the bigger point is this. How are their op-eds being published in 2022 trying to make the Proud Boys relatable? How is that possible even now? Is this how our democracy dies? I mean, you know the Proud Boys, right? The neo-fascist group or self-described Western chauvinist fight club that vaulted to fame in 2018 after members poured out of a speech at a Republican club in Manhattan and beat protesters on the street. That was the year after Proud Boys showed up at the deadly white nationalist Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, organized by a former member of the group. In recent weeks, Proud Boys in California have tried to disrupt multiple LGBTQ gatherings with slurs, with threats of violence, while other Proud Boys like Mr. Radovich are turning up at school board and city council meetings to rail against masks, vaccines, homosexuality, and, of course, critical race theory. The Proud Boys have basically fused their own campaigns with whatever the GOP moral panic talking point of the day is. Where could they have possibly gotten such an inflated idea of their own importance?
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
Ah, yes, the infamous presidential debate line that gave the Proud Boys a renewed sense of purpose in late 2020 and a convergence of interests with Donald Trump even after he lost that election, especially then. On January the 6th, there were many Proud Boys at the Capitol, and they were no longer merely just standing by. The Department of Justice has charged 5 Proud Boys, including the group's ex-leader, with seditious conspiracy for their alleged roles in that insurrection. A recent New York Times investigation found that the Proud Boys coordinated and instigated many of the Capitol breaches that day. And according to congressional January 6th committee hearings held last month, members of the Proud Boys told an FBI informant that they would have killed Vice President Mike Pence, quote, if given the chance. Funny none of that made it into Melissa's op-ed. They're just dads. We expect to learn much more about the January 6th role of the Proud Boys and other militant extremist right-wing groups like the Oath Keepers at Tuesday lunchtime's hearing, kicks off 1 p.m. Tuesday. But in the meantime, the Proud Boys' convergence of interests, as Congressman and committee member Jamie Raskin put it, with the Trump-led Republican Party grows. In fact, kind of outrageously and shockingly, half a dozen current and former Proud Boys now have seats on the executive committee of the Miami-Dade GOP, the largest county Republican Party in Florida. The Proud Boys are gaining political power. They are pushing their far-right propaganda in newspapers and at school board meetings. And even as their leadership faces charges for leading the first real insurrection against the U.S. government since the Civil War, the Proud Boys are still standing by, still effectively providing Donald Trump and the Republican Party with a private armed militia willing to do their bidding. What could go wrong? Joining me now is MSNBC political analyst Tim Miller. He's a never-Trump Republican and author of the new book, Why We Did It, a travelogue from the Republican Road to Hell. Also here is Tina Nguyen, national correspondent for Puck News, who has covered the intrigues in Trump world and the craziness of the MAGA movement practically since the beginning. Thank you both for joining me. Tim, your book is in many ways a personal mea culpa for helping build a Republican Party that put winning over governing. In fact, in 2016, you were the spokesperson for Jeb Bush's presidential campaign. Now we have Proud Boys on the executive committee of the GOP in Jeb's home county of Miami. When did you realize that you had helped lay the groundwork for a neo-fascist takeover of your party? And is that still hard to believe that that has happened?
Yeah, it's hard to believe. That's why I had to write a book about it and interview all my old friends and figure out why in the heck they're still going along with it, my former friends and colleagues. And I think that's the crux of this book, right? Look, there are a lot, and Tina is an expert in this. I'm sure she can talk about it. There is clearly a wing of the Republican Party that is increasing in power, that is, as you say, neo-fascist, that is sociopathic, that is openly bigoted, right? But then there are all these other folks, the people that were staffing the Miami-Dade Republican Party for years, many of them Cubans and pro-refugee, right? And many of these people are still going along with it and letting groups like the Proud Boys take over their organizations. And so I had to get at, why are they doing that? What is it that has allowed them to rationalize and justify being complicit in all of this? Because, for me, I think I look back on it with regret. Obviously, there were signs of this, when I was working in Iowa for Sarah Palin in 2008, maybe earlier. But clearly by January 6th, there are more than signs of it. I mean, it's right in front of all of our face. The Capitol is getting stormed, right? And so now the question is, how do you move forward from here? And it's been dispiriting how many people continue to go along with it as they gain, as this wing takes over the party.
Dispiriting is an understatement. Tina, Tim mentioned January the 6th. What do we know? I mean, we know about the Proud Boys and their participation in the Capitol insurrection. What we know about that is bad enough. But what do we know about their coordination with people close to Trump? How much more could we learn in this upcoming hearing on Tuesday?
There's a lot that we could learn from this upcoming hearing. One of the things that the committee will be looking at is footage from a documentary that was being taped on January 6th that followed Trump and his inner circle in trying to fight the results of the 2020 election. And one of those pieces of footage involved Roger Stone, is a longtime advisor, hatchet man, that guy, and his interactions with Proud Boys who were serving as his quote-unquote bodyguards in the days leading up to it. I was covering it at the time, and the way that they justified their presence was that they were there to protect MAGA supporters who traveled to the Capitol against Antifa BLM supporters. I was reporting on it during the months leading up to it. Antifa and BLM were actively making a point to not showing up, because the Proud Boys are at their core a reactionary movement. They are there to instigate fights with opponents to their cause. So the premise that they were there to protect Roger Stone and the MAGA movement, to any extremist researcher or someone in the know who's watching this, was clearly a pretext. So why they really were there, it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see.
So, Tim, Tina mentioned Roger Stone. We don't talk enough about Roger Stone, the long-standing GOP dirty tricks campaigner, Trump advisor, generally horrible human being. Stone has close ties to the Proud Boys. They have provided security for him. In fact, I believe we have photos here of Stone at his 2019 federal arraignment. Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio over his shoulder, wearing a shirt, I believe, that day that said Roger Stone did nothing wrong. Stone is at the center of a lot of January the 6th theories. What do we need to know? What should the average person at home know about Roger Stone? Because from where I'm sitting, he looks like a pretty key connection in recent years between full-blown fascism and one of our two main political parties.
Yeah, he has a key connection, and you know, during the Russia scandal, dating back to that, it was Roger Stone that was, you know, opening a line of communication with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, and you know, the forces, the Russian-backed forces that had hacked into, you know, the Democratic National Committee and other allies of Hillary Clinton. So, you know, he's been at the center of all of Trump's impeachments, right? And now we head forth to January 6th, and I think, you know, so much of what happened out in the open, right? Which makes these hearings sometimes, you know, there's this tension between they're telling us a story that we've all kind of learned in drips and drabs and then uncovering some new things. And I think the main thing left to be uncovered is there was a group at the Willard, Roger Stone, Steve Bannon, Rudy Giuliani, and others that were tied to the White House directly that were plotting actions on January 6th. How much were those groups talking to the Proud Boys and the groups that stormed the Capitol? How much were those groups talking to Mark Meadows and people in the White House? You know, those are some ties in the private conversations that have yet to be quite revealed, and I think Roger Stone is clearly wrapped up in all.
And Tina, we're all looking forward to this latest public hearing from the 1-6 committee on Tuesday at 1 p.m. But NBC News has confirmed today that the January 6th committee is rescheduling its Thursday night hearing, its prime time event that it was supposed to hold this coming week. Why do you think that's happened? Because that was a key hearing that was going to be led by, I believe, Adam Kinzinger and others on what the White House was doing as the insurrection unfolded. How smoothly are these hearings being rolled out? Because it's not the first hearing that's been delayed. What are you hearing?
Honestly, it's hard to say why they'd be rescheduling something like that. I wouldn't read too much into it. The last time that they tried to reschedule something at the last minute was when they brought up Cassidy Hutchinson, who was probably the most dramatic witness that's been brought up so far during said hearings. Tomorrow, I think, will be just as pivotal. Like, there is a thing that the American public has not made the link between the violence and Trump yet. And I think if there is going to be a criminal referral, they have to establish a more causal link between Trump wanting to keep the election in his favor and the Proud Boys throwing chairs through the windows of the Capitol and storming it to kill Mike Pence. At the moment, what they've shown is that Trump did not care whether Mike Pence died. Okay, that's willful negligence. Any further than that is something that the hearing still needs to establish. And it will be interesting to finally have the world understand what it is that makes a Proud Boy and why it is the Proud Boys were at the Capitol. I've been screaming this at the top of my lungs for years, but what Trump knew about the Proud Boys other than something on the surface is something that remains to be seen.
Tim, on Tuesday, the January 6th committee is going to hear from, among others, a former spokesperson for the Oath Keepers about how Donald Trump energized his movement back in 2016, 2017, forget 2020, 2021. This is an armed neo-fascist militant movement. To go back to your first answer at the start of this discussion, the people you worked with, the people you knew, were friends with, I have to ask, are those kind of people, were they always kind of fascistic and authoritarian and just hiding it? Or did they get radicalized by Trump and MAGA over the last 5-6 years?
Yeah, well, there are two categories, Mehdi, and I think it's important to understand this. I think to understand the threat, right? One is people that were radicalized. I wrote in the book about a friend of mine, Caroline Wren, who was basically a moderate Republican who went to Germany to help refugees, and all of a sudden she's wrapped up. She's there on January 6th. How do people do that? How does that happen and get radicalized? That's one element. For me, I think the more scary and concerning part is there are a lot of people that still to this day would not describe them as part of this authoritarian movement. They are, quote unquote, team normal, and they're using these complicated mental gymnastics to rationalize the fact and say, oh, these oath keepers, they're just over here on the side. That's not part of my movement. When obviously not only is it part of the movement, it's a key part that's taking over local political parties. And these folks, I think, are just using these complicated rationalizations to justify this. And I think that's at the heart of this, what we've learned the last 6 years. A lot of people who should know better, who told us they know better, going along with something evil because it benefits them in their career.
Tina, quick last question. I saw a quote doing the rounds on social media over the weekend. I think it's from a new book of an unnamed Republican member of Congress or outgoing member of Congress saying, well, our only plan is just wait for Donald Trump to die, effectively was the quote, if I remember it correctly. That's our plan for dealing with Trump. But the reality is you've been following this MAGA movement for a while. Even if Trump were to disappear tomorrow, the movement doesn't disappear. It's here to stay, is it not?
Absolutely. Even the MAGA movement finds that it needs someone to glom onto in order to act as its mouthpiece or its focusing prism to channel their big white light of pure blinding insanity into the eyes of the American public. Trump has served as that person. Trump doesn't necessarily always have to serve at that person. Right now, you're seeing a fairly strong debate in the party about whether Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, could serve as that channel. Trump obviously would like to keep the MAGA movement in his corner. However, Trump doesn't have the voice that he used to. I've talked to one MAGA Republican insider fairly high up in the community who was like, Trump needs to stay on Twitter. If Trump does not get back on Twitter, Trump is going to have a really hard time winning in 2024. He's not coming back on Twitter anytime soon.
I don't know whether to laugh or cry that is what American conservative politics has been reduced to. Tim Miller, Tina Nguyen, thank you both for your analysis. Appreciate it.